Hi everybody, I'm Beebs Kelley. Welcome back to the next episode in the Netflix series. The playlist is linked up here. Let's jump right in for episode 5 with this clip.
So I just did everything I could to make them proud and to really be a part of the family.
Completely disagree. And I think most everybody would disagree. This episode really fleshes out the negative press items as well as Harry and Meghan's delusional ideas that the negative stories were given to the press from within the palace walls or the family themselves in order to distract from other stories, which is false in every way and has been refuted and proven to not be true by literally every source possible. Everybody agrees who's involved that that's not how this works and not what was happening. When you look at this whole exercise of the Netflix series from the perspective of Harry and Meghan trying to use the Netflix projects as well as others, but specifically on topic here, the Netflix project, not only to try to create counter narratives and build a different image that's more to their liking, but also as a vehicle to send messages to the royal family, it really changes how you view what they say and what the Netflix series really is. Meghan is very clearly, repeatedly trying to send the message that she wanted to fit in and tried to do things the right way with the royals. And we see this manifest in her continually making excuses for her mistakes when she was with the royals. She tries to make excuses about she's just American, so she didn't get it, or that she was just really, really fried, and that's why she complained about her life in the Tom Bradby interview, that she just simply didn't know this or that and had to Google it and was so clueless, or that she was trying not to step on any toes. That's why she only wore beige, those sorts of things. The list of excuses goes on. She tries to blame her estrangement from Thomas on the media. She claims that she was told to write the letter to her father. She just deflects everything all the time. And it's a big mistake for them to never admit any mistakes, as we've discussed. But it's also clear that some of these things are in here as literal excuses to her behavior, probably in an attempt not only to soften the consequences of her actions to the public, but to the royals themselves. She and Harry even blame their rogue legal action over the letter on the palace for them not taking any action sooner, which doesn't really make sense, but it would appear that they understood or had been reprimanded for jumping the gun on that legal action, that the palace legal teams were formulating, a way to deal with the letter to her father that got leaked to the media, and Harry and Meghan in South Africa initiated a lawsuit about it on their own rather than being patient. Legal things take time. They even go as far as to blame their Christmas in Vancouver on the press and the lawsuits, which is fine. You want to take time. But the undertone here is that the royal family is somehow also to blame or involved in this, and the part that doesn't really make sense and is really rather unfair and manipulative when it comes to what they've done with their family here is the very sort of manipulation that they claim to want to fight against. Them putting out these exaggerated or different or alternate versions of events that are not entirely factual, not backed up by fact, and are leaving out massive chunks of facts change the way it's viewed. And that's not okay. And that's what they do. And at the same time, turn around and complain about that very thing happening in the media. They try to say that that's what happens to them and their image, but it's really not. It's more so that that's what they're doing. And some people who believe in karma would say that that's exactly what's happening here. Harry and Meghan are manipulating narratives and thus feel that narratives about them have been manipulated. But that's a whole separate mess.
What if we moved to Canada?
We thought it would be good to give ourselves some breathing space, but also we were really passionate about continuing our work throughout the Commonwealth to support the Queen.
Well, and also I think what's important is the pack of the Royal Rota is based there in London. So if we're not there, they can't cover what we're doing. You guys can be on the front pages of all the papers. You have it exactly the way you want it. And we can just go about doing the work in the name of the Queen.
When talking about wanting to take the Christmas to Vancouver, there was no need to add a tone that it was somehow anybody else's fault or choice but their own.
If you want us to go and do things on behalf of the Queen, we'll go and do it. And we'll pay for it ourselves. We don't want to be dependent on any taxpayer funding. Guess what? You get us for free. And this was years in the making. We really wanted to remove the supposed public interest argument that the press had over every element of our lives.
Well, yes, public interest is a thing when you're a public figure, and their idea here, the way that Meghan explains it, does come across as being much more irritated and almost competitive about the press coverage that they were getting versus the press coverage that, say, Catherine and William tend to get. And I think they really told on themselves here with the whole jealousy narrative. Harry is very clearly jealous of Catherine and the way the public adores her and her relationship with William. And Meghan is very clearly jealous of the status, seniority, and grace, maybe even the relationships that Catherine had established. Being somebody who was married into the family long before Meghan got there, Meghan could have very easily felt envious of Catherine's close relationship with, say, King Charles and other members of the family. But they together, the Sussexes, are the ones who really established the sort of jealous nature, jealous of the press coverage that Prince William and Catherine get and got.
Their argument was, if you have even 1% of public funding any part of your life, then we can basically claim public interests. We can invade your privacy on everything because you have public funds supporting you. In 2018, we'd already talked about perhaps moving to New Zealand.
From there, everything was really just viewed through those sort of competitive vibes, that jealous lens, and the envy that they had. It colored the way Harry and Meghan viewed their experience with the royal family because it changed the tone. And it would, in part, explain why there's such a disconnect and why the royal family still don't understand what Harry and Meghan's problem was and why they were so upset. Because they were upset about things that weren't really happening because they were feeling so jealous, which can make you view things very differently to how they actually are. Meghan implies that King Charles or his team were the ones that leaked the Megxit story, and it was very clearly upsetting to Harry and Meghan that their ideas on exiting the royal family had gotten leaked, or as Harry put it, taken from them. And so then they seemed to feel justified or felt in the right by putting out a statement of their own, but really it came across as spiteful and rude and did undermine the Queen. It is not the Sussexes' choice to say what their roles would be or evolve into within the royal family. That was up to the Queen or the monarch at the time. She was the one who was in charge of deciding what people's jobs will be, what they will do. And Harry and Meghan tried to take liberties there. That wouldn't fly in any other job situation, and they seem to still not really grasp that that's what they did. It wasn't so much that they put out a statement on their own on their way out the door. It was that they were trying to basically make a decision that they had no authority to make. And we all know how that mess happened that day.
It was then arranged that there was going to be a meeting at Sandringham on the following Monday.
Imagine a conversation, a round table discussion about the future of your life when the stakes are this high. And you as the mom and the wife and the target, in many regards, aren't invited to have a seat at the table.
It was clear to me that they planned it so that you weren't in the room.
The Sandringham Summit excluded Meghan Markle because she had only been part of the family for a very short period of time. She was not directly related to any of the people there, and because she was the source of a lot of the problems and drama and combativeness that was happening. It wouldn't make sense to have a new employee at a big meeting about some serious decisions. But also, additionally, it was only Queen Elizabeth, Prince William, Prince Harry, and King Charles. Well, at the time, Prince Charles. There were no other, wives present, even though, for example, Catherine, Princess of Wales, senior working royal, very much impacted her what was going to happen with the Sandringham Summit, just as it very much impacted Meghan. But here we have yet another new option that contradicts what they said in Oprah, that he was given 5 options at Sandringham Summit, and he chose the third option, which was a half in, half out. But then it turns out that was actually not possible. It doesn't really make sense what he says here. He does make it seem like the Queen didn't exercise her agency over the Sandringham Summit, that she was manipulated in some way. And then he complains about the joint statement that came out.
That day, a story that came out saying that part of the reason why Meghan and I were leaving was because William had bullied us out. Once I got in the car after the meeting, I was told about a joint statement that had been put out in my name and my brother's name, squashing the story about him bullying us out of the family. I couldn't believe it. No one had asked me. No one had asked me permission to put my name to a statement like that.
He essentially asserts that it was William's fault, which by all accounts is false. Meg's it was literally all Harry and Meghan. It was their choices, their unwillingness to calm down, be patient, follow guidelines for a while, see how things go, let things settle, all of it. They were against all of it. They were intent on finding drama and controversy at every turn. It's impossible to work with people like that.
And I rang and I told her, and she burst into floods of tears, because within 4 hours they were happy to lie to protect my brother. And yet, for 3 years, they were never willing to tell the truth to protect us.
Suddenly, what clicked in my head was, it's never going to stop. Every rumor, every negative thing, every lie, everything that I knew wasn't true and that the palace knew wasn't true and internally they knew wasn't true, that was just being allowed to fester.
So there was no other option at this point. I said, we need to get out of here.
A commentator says that Meghan felt she had to prove things to the public, and Harry says that it's predictable to blame the woman in the Megxit situation. Well, I think that people blamed Meghan in part for Megxit for very obvious reasons, but largely because she did seem to be doing a lot of background manipulations, and still does. She still seems to manipulate Harry's perception of things in a lot of ways, and I don't think that that's some sort of sexist angle that Harry's trying to imply. He himself admitted in Oprah that he wouldn't have left the royal family if it weren't for Meghan. And also, I don't think she was trying to prove herself. I don't think that she put in that much effort. As they dive deeper into the media coverage, they locate probably about 3 or 4 actually unacceptable moments in press coverage. And of course, there was a handful of unfair and over-the-top and inaccurate takes on Harry and Meghan published. But the majority of things that were like maybe a little out of bounds, a little over the top, a little too intense, were just comments online, which is no different than literally every other public figure on the planet. Anybody who has social media has had horrible comments, really, really mean feedback that's uncalled for and unfair. Harry seems to think and be very fixated on it being so much more serious because it's Meghan, or so much worse because it's Meghan, and literally no one else agrees with him. However, in this episode 5 here, they do manipulate the truth. They imply that the public and media temperature towards the couple was a sort of weird conspiracy, which is completely irrational and laughable. The public in general are not deep into the internet trolling spaces. That is a very small percentage. The general public, when polled, disapprove of Harry and Meghan simply because of what Harry and Meghan have put out into the public sphere with their own words and actions. But for a viewer of the Netflix series who is unfamiliar with all of this, or perhaps naive to these sorts of things, might take it seriously and actually believe that there was this effort to skew the perception of Meghan, which is just not true. Most people of the general public do not like Harry and Meghan due to their own actions, their hypocrisy, their patronizing words, their poor morals, their unethical ways, lying and trashing their family. It's not race or hate driven at all. When it comes to the majority, anyway, of course there is fringe people going over the top and going out of bounds, of course. Just like with every public figure, there's going to be some fringe super fans who are over the top, sycophantic, crazy, and some fringe haters who are over the top, crazy. But the majority of the people have chosen for themselves that they don't like Harry and Meghan because of what they're doing. The reality that Harry and Meghan really need to grasp is that they are disliked because of their own actions. Things like Oprah and Spare and their interviews. That's what the majority of the public disapproval is coming from, because that's what the majority of the public see. Most people don't spend a lot of time, digging deep into the weird conspiracy theories out there. Most people just see what's in the headlines, the things that hit the news, and they've decided that it doesn't seem quite right, or it doesn't sound quite right, or they don't really care for Harry and Meghan vibes and what they've chosen to do. The majority of people just simply don't care enough to go beyond opting out of approving of the Sussexes and their saga of drama, or have simply recognized that everywhere Harry and Meghan go, drama and negativity seem to follow. What really stood out to me at this part of the episode was that when she discusses the hate that she was receiving, at no point have she or Harry ever actually decided to take literal real steps back from public view. They don't ever actually decide to do what could truly solve the problem, which would be to stop looking at the internet, stop putting out statements, stop pushing yourselves on the public. Just stop. Take it easy for a while. And so it does make people question whether they are that bothered by the negativity or whether it's more of this defiance of wanting to fight the negative feedback rather than being actually hurt by the negative feedback.
Remember that what is transpiring in the media, what's being created, is an illusion. When you try to prove that you're good and that you're not the person they say you are, you're taking the bait. You're feeding the beast. It is an illusion. Your work is not to prove your goodness. You know who you are, both of you.
I think this was maybe not the best clip to include because it really did only serve to demonstrate their navel-gazing ways. It didn't really set a good example of how they stay, in a good mental space, because they obviously aren't in a very good mental space to be this complainy all the time. They're not very positive. They're quite negative. So I don't think this clip came across the way they thought that it would come across as a positive, good, healthy moment. It came across more wallowing. So Meghan concludes this episode pontificating about how she was blamed over Harry wanting to leave or change their role by saying that it wasn't her fault, which is partly true. It's both of their faults. Harry made sure no one would mistake that with spare. Everybody blames Harry and Meghan both for the things that they've done.
Farewell week they did all these engagements back to back. It was just it was a real whirlwind.
Until that last week in the UK, I rarely wore color. Never wanted to upstage or ruffle any feathers. Just tried to blend in, but I wore a lot of color that week. Just felt well, let's just look like a rainbow.
Well, this is just nonsense. We've seen Meghan in almost exclusively beige and bland colors since she left the royal family, so this entire elaborate story was completely pointless and a complete and utter lie. Just fabricated to put into here to try to make the royal family seem bad, I guess, and restrictive. Super strange. One of those unnecessary lies that narcissists tend to tell. Why would you even bother lying about something so small and silly? But it also may have been another one of those instances where she was actually trying to speak to the royals in a way. Because she wore green to the Commonwealth Day service, it ended up making it look like a Christmas situation because they were all supposed to be wearing reds and blues or whites, and she wore green. And it was seen as kind of a rude thumbing the nose at the royals. This may have been a situation where she was trying to make an excuse for herself, that she was wearing green to the Commonwealth Day service, not to be contrary, but to be fun.
He came and he knelt next to my seat and he took his hat off. And I just remember looking at him, he goes, "We appreciate everything you did for our country." And it was the first time that I felt like someone saw the sacrifice, not for my own country, for this country. It's not mine. We landed in Canada and one of our security guards who had been with H for so long, these guys were so wonderful, I just collapsed in his arms crying. I was like, "I tried so hard." He goes, "I know you did. I know you did, ma'am. I know you did." I tried so hard.
No one believes any of this, to be sure. It really makes no sense. No one knew how out they were going to be from the royals at this point, so it doesn't really make sense what they're saying here. No logic to it whatsoever. As episode 5 ended, they touched on Harry and Meghan's official exit from the UK and security being removed. But again, we have another different version of events. He had 3 weeks warning, still refused to mention that COVID played a role in those security officers needing to be pulled by a certain date so they didn't get stuck and trapped with Harry and Meghan and unable to re-enter the UK. Lying by omission is still lying, still not okay. Episode 6 opens with Tyler Perry explaining that he empathized with the challenges of family issues during life changes like these when he saw what was happening with Thomas leading up to the wedding, which I think most of us also did at first. Families are really, really complicated, and if someone's been super toxic throughout your life or your childhood, or just you've had a horrible falling out, you don't really owe anything to them, especially just because you're getting married or something like that. You don't owe it to them to be involved just because of that, or like because you've become wealthy the way Meghan married into a wealthy family, you know what I mean? And I think that was the vibe that people had at first. But the hole in the story here is that Meghan and all the drama with her family and her dad specifically had a lot of contradictions, a lot of differing accounts, and even the Meg appears to have manipulated a lot of the situation.
Finally, after years at that point, first time we ever spoke, and I was just a wreck. I was just crying and crying. Like, sometimes it's easier to just open up to someone who knows nothing at all. And that was that moment with me and Tyler.
Or is it just easier to lie, to manipulate or exaggerate when you're talking to somebody who doesn't know anything about what you're talking about? You know? Maybe. Kind of how that came across there.
The most that I knew about the royal family was around Princess Diana's death. There's a moment that I'll never forget where she's walking through the airport and she has a tennis racket in front of her face and she's trying to get away from the press. They're all over her. And I realized that after the marriage ended, she was thrown to the wolves.
I started questioning at this point was, did they take advantage of Tyler Perry's generosity? The Diana clip does demonstrate that they kind of did, because Diana turned down palace security upon divorcing Charles. She chose not to keep her same security detail because she was, by her own words, paranoid that they would like spy on her whereabouts and whatnot. Tyler is clearly unaware of this, and they don't mention it to give that context that's important. And so it does kind of leave me thinking that maybe they kind of manipulated Tyler's perception of things to some extent.
To use the institution to try and do all the things that a batterer would do, like, oh, here's what we're going to do. We're going to cut off the money. We're going to not leave you security. We're going to do all those things to make you comply and come back.
So this is not the same thing at all. Harry and Meghan left their jobs as senior working royals. They also left the country where there was palace grounds to live on. You do not get to keep the money and the security and the house and the pay and the perks when you quit a job. So that is just simply false, not the same thing at all. You can't compare the two. Apples and oranges. No, oranges and bananas? Not the same thing. They discuss their move to Tyler Perry's house, the security efforts and the privacy concerns that they had while staying there, that once the press found out where they were staying at Tyler Perry's house, they had to like enhance the security there. But it has since come out that Meghan Markle was the one doxing herself. She leaked it to the paparazzi where she was staying with Harry both times, in Canada and in California. A good portion to this episode is dedicated to discussing the lawsuit over the letter to her dad. It also touches on an essay that she published about her miscarriage, which is its own entire story by itself, but it did contradict Meghan's version and her friend Abigail's version of events that day, which is a bit odd. The episode literally shows us snippets from the article about how Meghan said that morning she was alone when this began, but then Abigail is being interviewed for the Netflix thing and is seen immediately after saying a completely different version of events from that day. So I don't really understand why they would show us an inconsistency like that in the series itself, that the editors didn't catch it or something. Or maybe they just didn't think it was a significant enough contradiction to matter. I don't know. But the next really significant point in the episode was discussing the Oprah interview and the Sussexes pushing their erroneous idea that the bullying report was simply a retaliation to the Oprah interview. But the dates don't align on that, nor does it make sense. Employees had complained about Meghan and Harry and their behavior long before they had left the royal family and anybody knew that they'd be sitting down with Oprah. HR had been dealing with it at their own pace ever since, and it just so happened to hit the news around the same time, even though it was technically old news to everybody within the palace and HR.
Tell us about the thinking about sitting with Oprah. Well, Oprah had originally reached out to us through the communications director when we were at Kensington Palace. There was excitement, I remember that. And then I think we talked.
Yeah, because Oprah to you was like,
It's Oprah.
yeah.
Since they surely know by now that the Oprah interview was a massive mistake, this really comes across and sounds like an attempt to justify the Oprah interview.
The timing of when we would talk to her just kept changing.
And sitting down with Oprah was a reaction to what had happened that year.
The more distance that came between us having a smaller role with the institution and coming over here, the more of a vacuum was being built, and people just genuinely didn't understand why we left.
We thought that was the beginning of our year of transition, which turns out was anything but a transition. Well, it's just a beating.
So they didn't go deep into Meghan's mental health crisis, depression, how she went through it, what her solutions were, how she came out of it, and how she stays mentally in a better place. They didn't go into any of that during the Oprah interview. The majority of the Oprah interview was about injustices and things that she was upset by and thought weren't fair. That was the majority of the airtime. So why she would think that the takeaway would be anything other than that makes no sense to me at all. It sounds like a cop-out and just deflecting responsibility or avoiding it altogether. No accountability for Harry and Meghan, that's for sure.
We didn't see it until the world saw it. And it's interesting. I thought that me being very open about the depression that I experienced and just how extreme that became, I thought that would be the biggest takeaway. Oh my God. But it was entirely eclipsed by the conversation surrounding race.
She didn't even ever mention in the Oprah interview what she did to get out of her mental health crisis. So it maketh no sense to claim that that should have been the chief takeaway from the Oprah interview at all.
Beyonce just texted. Really meant.
Shut up.
Just checking in.
Just checking in. Just casual.
I still can't believe she knows who I am.
Don't call her.
No, it's okay. She said she wants me to feel safe and protected. She admires and respects my bravery and vulnerability, and she thinks I was selected to break generational curses that need to be healed.
I don't believe this fully or at all, really. But if Beyonce had texted Meghan, I'm sure she wouldn't appreciate the exposure here that her message was read aloud on Netflix when she sent a private text message. Harry and Meghan have no problem violating anyone else's privacy. It's only their own privacy that they care about. There is a segment dedicated to the memory and passing of Prince Philip next in this episode, which obviously didn't set well with very many people, seeing as Harry and Meghan had been very, very focused on creating a lot of stress and trouble during that time for Prince Philip, as well as for Queen Elizabeth II, as she was dealing with the loss of the love of her life, her husband of decades and decades, that they had been making things harder on her during a very painful time. Kind of upset people that they spent time talking fondly about Prince Philip at all, even though it's Harry's grandfather, because they just felt that they had been so cold towards the family that they shouldn't have.
It was hard, especially spending time having chats with my brother and my father who just focused on the same misinterpretation of the whole situation. So none of us really wanted to have to talk about it at my grandfather's funeral, but we did. And I've had to make peace with the fact that I'm probably never going to get genuine accountability or a genuine apology. My wife and I were moving on. We're focused on what's coming next.
Here, Harry is completely missing the fact that he is assuming this is a misinterpretation, probably because that's a lot easier for him to be able to avoid accountability, rather than hearing, accepting, contemplating his family's side or feelings or, the fact that maybe Harry's not being fed the full truth from Meghan a lot of the time, and it's causing these conflicts. This episode sort of concludes with, I guess, a more lighthearted personal tone about what they're looking towards the future for, what they're looking towards. It gave the vibe of punctuation to the wallowing. But then they kept hammering away at things with Spare, for example, and other interviews that followed Netflix, unfortunately for everyone, including us, who had to watch it and listen to it and see it. Near the end of the episode, Meghan reads her speech from their wedding night, which I actually covered in a recent video. I'll link it for you. Well, not recent now. Gosh, that's been a while. I'll link it for you. We go deep into it there and really discuss the cringiness of it. So if you're interested, go watch it. It's a good, fun video. But at the end of the Netflix series, they include this legal disclosure that their accusation in this clip...
Sadly, there's just no way he could have done that without the authority of his bosses.
Let me deal with it.
But so how do we deal with that? Like, how on earth... Like, that... I know. It's your brother.
Yep.
I'm not going to say anything about your brother, but it's so obvious. It's like...
It's even more obvious the fact they'll try and cover that.
What they said there, their accusations there, were completely false towards Prince William and Jason. It is really representative of the Sussexes' constant need to twist every single thing into an injustice. Something that was completely had nothing to do with the Sussexes and was not out to get them at all, just some dude doing his job, doing what's asked of him. They twisted into an injustice, rather than taking a step back and seeing that not everything is all about them. Overall, the series really oscillated between this overdramatic, fragile, such big injustices and so horrible, and this vibe of their love story, trying to just talk about this more personal tone in their personal lives and show snippets of their personal lives, which I don't think worked together very well for the flow of the series overall, because then there was also this like third arc to the series where they were trying to magnify it out into this bigger issue of like representation and the monarchy in general, and they had like people giving opinions, not facts, but opinions on tones of colonialism and things like that, and what Meghan meant for that dynamic. Had she stuck around a little bit longer, I think it would have made sense for that to be included in the discussion. But she attended less than 75 engagements over the course of a couple of years and didn't really deliver much value to the cultural conversation. She and Harry have really carved out for themselves an identity as complainers, fragile, brittle, self-absorbed, really, really focused on their representation in the world, their experience, how they're viewed, rather than what they can reflect back out into the world and what they can actually like show through, you know, good behaviors and actions and being a source and force of positivity and good. They say they want to be, but they don't actually do it. They haven't really contributed culturally, because when you think about Harry and Meghan, you just think about people who whine and complain and point out negatives all the time and haven't actually brought forth anything positive, or even set a good example. Because at least, you know, with, for example, if you loosely follow things in the headlines, at least you can see that, like, for example, Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, when they're in the press, it's easily identifiable and associated with something positive. A positive message, a positive outlook on positive change for Earthshot Prize, conservation, or homewards, coming up with a solution. That is a positive, trying to make a solution happen. Or the early years, work in that arena is something that's automatically viewed as positive, is automatically what we associate with the Prince and Princess of Wales. Their image is simpatico with those positives. Because Harry and Meghan have spent so much time, like with this Netflix series, Spare, all their other interviews and projects, that were very high profile. Don't get me wrong, it would be just as high profile if the Prince and Princess of Wales did it. But Harry and Meghan did these high profile projects and took on a negative complaining tone every time. And so their image is forever intertwined with this cloud of negativity and jealousy, and it just doesn't make much sense to the public to be that malcontent when you have so much opportunity to do things differently. That's kind of the overall vibe that I got and left from the Netflix series with after watching it over the course. It took me 2 weeks to watch and put together these summaries. And next up, we have an analysis talking a little bit more about what the real angles and message at the end of the day for Meghan and Harry have been. So if the summary videos were too long, didn't watch them, don't miss the analysis coming up next. Be sure you're subscribed, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a happy day, everybody. Bye.